The silence was wrong. Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of Terra's Hope and watched the empty space where the Zephyrian home fleet should have been. For 300 years, the blue-skinned aliens had maintained constant patrol around their twin suns, but now nothing moved except cosmic dust and dying light. Jake touched the communication panel with steady fingers. His crew of 40 humans had been exploring the outer rim for 6 months when the first distress signals reached them. At first they thought it was some kind of solar storm interfering with the galactic network, but the messages that came through were too clear and too desperate to be anything natural. Lieutenant Ben Carter looked up from his station with worry in his dark eyes. The young officer had been monitoring alien frequencies since they left Earth, and what he found made no sense. Entire star systems that had been broadcasting for millennia had gone completely quiet in the span of just weeks. "Sir, the Christic Collective just sent their final transmission," Ben said in a voice that tried to stay calm. "They're evacuating their core worlds and heading for deep space." Something about shadow entities that eat stars. Jake felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. The Christic were among the oldest and most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. Their crystal ships could bend space itself, and their weapons could crack planets in half. If they were running, then whatever was out there had to be beyond anything the galaxy had ever faced. Captain Lisa Ward appeared on the main screen from her position aboard the escort ship New Horizon. Her red hair was pulled back tight, and her green eyes showed the same concern that Jake felt. Lisa had commanded deep space missions for over a decade, and she had never seen anything like the reports flooding their communication systems. "Jake, we're getting more emergency broadcasts," Lisa said. "The Kellen warrior fleets are requesting immediate assistance. Their entire third armada just disappeared near the Vega sector. No explosion, no debris, no trace they were ever there." The Kellens were proud fighters who had never asked anyone for help in their 1,000-year history. Their ships were built for war, and their warriors trained from birth to face any enemy. For them to send distress calls meant the situation was worse than Jake had imagined. Dr. Alex Chun joined them on the bridge, carrying a datapad filled with energy readings that made no sense. The thin scientist had been analyzing the few sensor traces they had managed to capture from the affected systems. His findings painted a picture that challenged everything they knew about physics and warfare. "Admiral, I've been studying the residual energy patterns from the destroyed worlds," Alex said while adjusting his thick glasses. "Whatever these entities are, they don't follow normal rules. They seem to exist partially outside our dimension, which explains why conventional weapons can't touch them." Jake studied the data and felt his training as a military officer clash with the impossible readings. The energy signatures showed mass displacements that should have been detectable from light years away, but somehow these void hunters, as the aliens called them, could appear and disappear without warning. "Commander." Beth Stevens came running onto the bridge with a communication device in her hands. The tall woman had been monitoring the emergency channels, and her face was pale with shock. What she had heard would change everything for humanity and their place in the galaxy. "Sir, I just intercepted a general broadcast from the Galactic Federation." "Emergency Council," Beth said while catching her breath. "They're calling for any and all species to respond with military assistance. The Void Hunters have consumed over 200 star systems in the past month, and they're accelerating." Jake looked at the star map that showed red zones spreading like a disease across the galaxy. Each red dot represented billions of lives lost and entire civilizations erased from existence. The pattern showed the entities moving in multiple directions at once, as if they were coordinated by some central intelligence. "What about the Federation fleets?" Jake asked. "They have millions of ships and weapons that can destroy solar systems." Beth shook her head with grim certainty. "Gone, sir. The main battle fleet engaged a Void Hunter swarm near Antares 3 days ago. 2 million ships reduced to scrap metal in less than an hour. The survivors report that energy weapons just passed through." "The entities, like they're not really there?" The bridge fell silent as the magnitude of the threat became clear. The greatest military force in galactic history had been swept aside like dust in a hurricane. Civilizations that had ruled space for thousands of years were fleeing in terror. From an enemy they couldn't understand or fight, Jake made a decision that would echo across the stars. He opened a channel to Earth and began composing a message that would mobilize his entire species. Humanity had only been in space for a few centuries, and their technology was considered primitive by galactic standards, but they had something the older races seemed to have lost. "This is Admiral Morrison calling Earth Command," Jake said into the transmitter. "The galaxy is under attack by entities that conventional forces cannot stop. We are humanity's only representatives in the affected region, and I'm requesting immediate authorization to render assistance to any surviving Federation forces." The response came back within hours, carrying the full authority of Earth's government and military. Humanity would answer the galaxy's call for help, even though they had never been formally invited to join the galactic community. What happened next would prove that sometimes the newest voice in the chorus could sing the song that saved them all. Dr. Alex Chen had not slept in 3 days. The research lab aboard Luna Station hummed with activity as human. Scientists worked around the clock to understand an enemy that defied every law of physics they knew. The data from Admiral Morrison's encounter with Void Hunter Aftermath painted a picture of destruction so complete that even the atoms had been stripped away. Alex stared at the holographic display showing energy patterns that twisted through dimensions humanity had only theorized about. The Void Hunters existed in multiple phases of reality at once, which explained why the advanced energy weapons of the Galactic Federation passed through them harmlessly. It was like trying to shoot shadows with light. "The key is in the phase variance," Alex muttered to his assistant Dr. Carol Wright as she brought him another cup of coffee. "They shift between our dimension and whatever space they come from. But during the feeding process, they have to stabilize in our reality to consume matter." Carol studied the readings with fresh eyes and pointed to a spike in the data. The blonde scientist had specialized in theoretical physics before the crisis began, and her insights were proving valuable. What she saw gave them their first real hope of fighting back. "Look at this pattern during the consumption of the Rigel system," Carol said. For approximately 14 minutes the entities showed consistent dimensional stability. They couldn't phase out while they were actively draining the star's energy. Meanwhile, on the other side of the solar system, Commander Beth Stevens was preparing for humanity's first official contact with the Galactic Federation. Her diplomatic ship Harmony carried a crew of 12 humans and enough communication equipment to translate between hundreds of alien languages. The mission was risky since the Federation had never formally recognized Earth as an equal member. Beth reviewed her briefing materials as they approached the Emergency Council meeting point near Kepler Prime. The surviving Federation leaders had established their base on a heavily fortified world deep in neutral space. Ancient defense satellites and automated weapon platforms protected the planet while refugee fleets gathered in orbit. "Commander, we're receiving a transmission from the Christic delegation," reported Lieutenant Jerry Adams from the communication station. "They're demanding to know our authorization for approaching the council session." Beth straightened her uniform and prepared to make humanity's case. The Christic were known for their logical approach to everything, and they would need solid reasoning to accept human participation. What she said next would determine whether humanity got a seat at the table or was turned away as irrelevant. "Tell them we come bearing potential solutions to the Void Hunter threat," Beth replied. "Our research has identified possible weaknesses in their dimensional phasing ability." The response came back faster than expected and carried a tone of desperate interest. The crystal beings who had once dismissed humanity as primitive were now willing to listen to anyone who claimed to have answers. Desperation had a way of making even the proudest species humble. General Mike Torres stood before the largest gathering of alien leaders in galactic history. The war room on Kepler Prime contained representatives from over 300 species, and the air was thick with tension and the smell of exotic atmospheres. Some aliens breathed methane while others required high radiation levels to survive. Mike activated the holographic display showing human military doctrine and weapon systems. The assembled aliens looked confused as he explained kinetic weapons and explosive devices. Most galactic civilizations had moved beyond such primitive methods thousands of years ago in favor of energy, manipulation, and gravity weapons. You fight with metal projectiles and chemical explosives, stated Elder Thane of the Christic in a voice like wind through crystal caves. Such methods are inefficient and wasteful compared to focused energy beams. General Torres smiled grimly and activated a recording from Earth's military archives. The display showed human weapons testing, including railguns that could accelerate projectiles to significant fractions of light speed and nuclear devices that could crack moons. The alien observers fell silent as they watched the raw destructive power. The advantage of kinetic weapons is that they exist purely in our dimensional phase, Mike explained. Energy can be deflected or absorbed, but a chunk of metal moving at relativistic speeds follows basic physics. If we can modify our projectiles to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, they should be able to strike the Void Hunters even during phase transitions. Engineer Roy Clark had been working for 72 hours straight modifying a standard human railgun. His workshop on Luna Station was filled with prototype components and theoretical calculations covering every available surface. The breakthrough came when he realized that quantum uncertainty could be weaponized. If we coat the projectiles with particles existing in quantum superposition, they should maintain contact with multiple dimensional phases, Roy explained to the gathered scientists. The uncertainty principle means they're everywhere and nowhere until the moment of impact. The first test firing took place in an isolated section of the asteroid belt. Roy's modified railgun launched a quantum-enhanced projectile at a target drone that had been equipped with Void Hunter technology salvaged from attack systems. The results were promising but needed refinement. Lieutenant Commander Pete Rogers volunteered to test the weapons against actual Void Hunter scouts. His patrol ship Eagle's Wing had been fitted with 3 prototype railguns and a crew brave enough to face the unknown. The opportunity came when sensors detected a small Void Hunter probe near Proxima Centauri. Target acquired, Pete announced to his crew of 8 volunteers. The entity appears to be in partial phase but maintaining enough stability to affect local space-time. The first shot missed completely as the Void Hunter shifted dimensions, but the second projectile struck home. The entity reeled from the impact, and its phase stability fluctuated wildly. For the first time since the invasion, a human weapon had actually damaged one of the shadow creatures. News of the successful test spread through the remaining Federation networks faster than light communications could carry it. Species that had written off Earth as a backwater planet began sending delegations to Luna Station. The Zephyrians offered their knowledge of Void Hunter movement patterns, while the Kellen warriors shared tactical data from their failed engagements. Commander Beth Stevens found herself coordinating between human engineers and alien scientists as they worked to refine the quantum weapons. The cooperation was awkward at first since most species had never worked as equals with humans before. Cultural differences and communication barriers slowed progress, but desperation motivated everyone to find common ground. The Andromedans have manufacturing facilities that survived the initial attacks, Beth reported to Earth Command. They're willing to help mass produce our modified weapons in exchange for the technology specifications. What started as humanity's desperate attempt to help had become the foundation for an alliance between species. The galaxy had begged for help, and humanity was the only one who answered, but now they weren't fighting alone. The tide was beginning to turn. Admiral Susan Blake stood in the command center of Earth's orbital shipyard and watched as humanity transformed itself into a war machine. Every available facility from Luna to the outer planets was working day and night to build weapons that could save the galaxy. The scale of the operation was unprecedented in human history, and the clock was ticking faster than anyone wanted to admit. Production report, Susan called out to her staff. The thin woman had commanded Earth's space defense forces for 8 years, but nothing had prepared her for mobilizing an entire species against an impossible enemy. Colonel Don Hayes approached with a data tablet showing construction numbers, that made him smile despite the circumstances. The broad-shouldered officer had spent the last month converting civilian vessels into weapons platforms, and the results exceeded all expectations. "Ma'am, we've completed modifications on 237 ships in the past week," Don reported. "Mining vessels, cargo haulers, passenger liners, and even some luxury cruise ships. If it can mount a railgun and travel faster than light, we're putting it in the fleet." Susan looked at the tactical display showing Earth's growing armada. Most of the ships looked nothing like traditional military vessels, but they carried the quantum-enhanced kinetic weapons that could actually hurt the Void Hunters. Sometimes necessity created the strangest solutions. Dr. Amy Foster had made the breakthrough that changed everything. The young physicist was working in her laboratory aboard the research station Galileo when she discovered how to stabilize quantum uncertainty in solid projectiles. Her technique allowed any kinetic weapon to exist in multiple dimensional phases simultaneously. "The key is maintaining the particles in superposition until the moment of impact," Amy explained to the gathered scientists. "We use quantum field generators to keep the ammunition in a state of dimensional flux. When it hits a target, the superposition collapses and the projectile manifests in whichever dimension the target occupies." The theory was complex, but the application was surprisingly simple. Human engineers could retrofit any kinetic weapon with quantum field generators using materials that were common throughout human space. Within days of Amy's announcement, every shipyard in the solar system was installing the new systems. Lieutenant Commander Pete Rogers was becoming famous throughout the galaxy for his successful engagement with Void Hunter Scouts. His ship Eagle's Wing had destroyed 3 enemy probes and damaged several larger entities. The tactical data from his encounters was being studied by military leaders across hundreds of species. "The entities seemed to have a hierarchy," Pete explained. During a briefing with Federation officers, "The smaller scouts are more agile but less stable in our dimension. The larger hunters can maintain phase consistency longer, but they're slower to react to conventional tactics." Pete's crew had developed new fighting techniques that took advantage of human flexibility. Unlike the rigid battle formations used by most galactic militaries, human ships could adapt their strategies in real time. This unpredictability was proving effective against an enemy that seemed to anticipate traditional tactics. Engineer Bob Miller was working 16-hour shifts to establish mass production of the quantum weapons. His facility on Mars had been converted from manufacturing civilian electronics to creating the field generators that made human weapons effective against the Void Hunters. The demand was overwhelming, but Bob had never felt more purpose in his work. "We're shipping complete retrofit kits to our alien allies," Bob told his production team. "The Zephyrians have volunteer fleets ready for combat, and the Andromedans are providing raw materials from their surviving worlds." The cooperation between species was growing stronger as the shared threat brought former strangers together. Human engineers worked alongside alien technicians to install quantum weapons on vessels designed by civilizations thousands of years older than humanity. Cultural differences faded when survival was at stake. Admiral Susan Blake received the report she had been waiting for from Commander Beth Stevens. The diplomatic mission to the Federation Council had resulted in formal recognition of Earth as a full member of the galactic community. More importantly, humanity had been granted authority to coordinate the military response against the Void Hunters. "The Federation has transferred operational command of all remaining fleets to human oversight," Beth reported from her position aboard the diplomatic vessel. "They're calling it the Terran Defense Initiative." Susan felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. Millions of ships from hundreds of species would now follow human battle plans against an enemy that had already consumed a third of the galaxy. The fate of countless civilizations rested on tactics developed by the youngest spacefaring race. Captain Rick Stone commanded the first mixed human-alien task force to engage a major Void Hunter swarm. His battleship Liberty's Edge led a fleet of 200 vessels from 12 different species. The target was a group of entities threatening the Andromedan colonies where millions of refugees had taken shelter. "All ships report ready for combat," Rick announced to his multinational crew. Remember, the entities will try to phase out when we attack. Maintain continuous fire and use irregular patterns to prevent them from predicting our movements. The battle began when long-range sensors detected 50 Void Hunters approaching the Andromedan system. The entities moved in perfect formation, suggesting they were controlled by a single intelligence. Human tactical doctrine called for breaking up such formations before they could coordinate their attacks. Rick ordered his ships to attack from multiple vectors simultaneously. Human vessels used their quantum railguns to damage the entities, while alien ships provided support with energy weapons and defensive screens. The combination of different technologies created tactical options that neither group could achieve alone. Direct hit on the lead entity, reported Lieutenant Carroll Wright from the weapons station. The target is showing severe phase instability and falling back from the formation. The Void Hunters tried to adapt to the human tactics, but their rigid patterns made them predictable. Rick's fleet used rapid course changes and unpredictable firing patterns to keep the entities off balance. Several hunters attempted to phase out of normal space, but the quantum weapons followed them through dimensional barriers. Commander Janet Morris coordinated supply lines that stretched across light years to keep the growing fleet operational. Her logistics network connected human manufacturing centers with alien resource worlds and refugee stations. The complexity of managing such an operation challenged every organizational system ever developed. We're maintaining supply chains to over 400 combat vessels, Janet reported to Earth Command. The Kellen warriors are providing escort services while the Christic are offering their ships as mobile supply depots. The war was bringing out the best qualities in every species. Human adaptability combined with alien knowledge and resources to create something greater than the sum of its parts. The galaxy that had once dismissed humanity as insignificant was now depending on human leadership to survive. Dr. Amy Foster announced her latest breakthrough just as the first major victories were being reported. She had discovered a way to create weapons that could track Void Hunters through their dimensional transitions. The new technology promised to end the entity's greatest advantage. If we can lock onto their quantum signature, we can follow them wherever they go, Amy explained. To the research team, the Hunters won't be able to escape by phasing out of our reality. The tide of war was finally turning in favor of the Galactic Alliance, but everyone knew the real test was yet to come. The Void Hunters were regrouping in the galactic core, where their numbers were beyond counting. The final battle would determine whether the galaxy survived or fell into eternal darkness. Captain Rick Stone felt the vibration through Liberty's edge as another volley of quantum-enhanced projectiles left the ship's railguns. His mixed-species fleet was engaged in the largest battle since the Void Hunter invasion began, and the outcome would determine the fate of 3 star systems. Around him, alien and human crew members worked together with a coordination that would have been impossible just months earlier. Enemy formation breaking apart, reported Lieutenant Sarah Davis from the tactical station. The young officer had become expert at reading Void Hunter movement patterns, and her predictions had saved countless lives. The entities are trying to envelope our flanks, but they're moving too slowly. Rick smiled grimly as he watched his tactical display. The Void Hunters were learning to adapt to human strategies, but they still thought in terms of overwhelming force rather than flexible tactics. Their ancient intelligence was struggling to understand an enemy that refused to follow established patterns of warfare. Signal the Zephyrian squadrons to begin their attack run, Rick ordered. Tell them to maintain irregular spacing and keep their energy shields at maximum power. The blue-skinned aliens had initially been skeptical of human battle tactics, but recent victories had converted even the most traditional commanders. Their sleek ships moved through space like schools of fish, while human vessels provided covering fire with weapons that could strike targets in multiple dimensions. Commander Janet Morris was coordinating the battle from her position aboard the command ship New Dawn. Her communication systems linked hundreds of vessels from dozens of species into a single fighting force. The complexity of managing such diversity would have been impossible without the universal translator systems that Human engineers had improved. All sectors report enemy contact, Janet announced to the fleet commanders. The Void Hunters are committing over 2,000 entities to this engagement. They appear to be testing our new defensive formations. The entities had grown more cautious since human weapons proved capable of damaging them. Instead of the overwhelming rushes that had destroyed entire Federation fleets, the Void Hunters now use probing attacks and careful positioning. This change in tactics gave the Allied forces opportunities that hadn't existed before. Engineer Bob Miller watched his weapon systems perform under combat conditions from his station aboard a converted cargo hauler. The ship's steady progress had been transporting grain between colonies just 3 months ago, but now it carried enough firepower to threaten capital ships. The transformation of civilian vessels was one of humanity's greatest contributions to the war effort. Quantum field generators holding steady, Bob reported to his captain. We can maintain continuous fire for another 6 hours before needing to recharge the dimensional stabilizers. The battle raged across an area of space larger than most solar systems. Void Hunter entities phased in and out of normal reality while Allied ships pursued them with weapons that ignored dimensional barriers. The sight was both beautiful and terrifying as energy beams and kinetic projectiles filled the darkness between stars. Dr. Amy Foster monitored the engagement from her research vessel breakthrough, where she was testing her latest weapon innovations. The quantum tracking systems were performing beyond expectations and allowing human gunners to hit targets that were partially phased out of normal space. Her work was revolutionizing space combat across the galaxy. The tracking algorithms are adapting to Void Hunter evasion patterns, Amy reported to Admiral Blake. Each successful hit teaches the system more about their dimensional signature. Lieutenant Commander Pete Rogers led a squadron of fast attack craft in a daring assault on a group of Void Hunter command entities. These larger creatures seemed to coordinate the actions of smaller hunters, and destroying them could disrupt entire enemy formations. The mission was dangerous, but the potential rewards were enormous. Stay close to my ship and follow my lead, Pete transmitted to his squadron. We're going to hit them fast and get out before they can coordinate a response. Pete's ships dove toward the command entities at maximum acceleration while launching volleys of quantum-enhanced missiles. The Void Hunters tried to phase out, but the new tracking systems locked onto their dimensional signatures and followed them through space-time. 3 command entities were destroyed before the others could escape. Captain Lisa Ward commanded the defensive screen protecting the Allied supply ships and medical vessels. Her destroyer patrol fought a running battle with Void Hunter scouts while the main fleet engaged the primary enemy force. The importance of her mission couldn't be overstated, since losing the support vessels would cripple the entire campaign. Enemy scouts attempting to break through Sector 7, Lisa reported. We're moving to intercept, but they're using new phasing patterns that our weapons are having trouble tracking. The Void Hunters were learning to counter human technology, but their adaptation was slow compared to human innovation. Dr. Foster's team was constantly updating weapon systems and tactical programs to stay ahead of enemy countermeasures. The war had become a race between human creativity and ancient alien intelligence. Admiral Susan Blake coordinated the overall battle from her flagship, Democracy's Shield, while monitoring reports from across the engagement zone. The scale of the operation required precise timing and communication between forces scattered across light years of space. Human command and control systems were proving superior to traditional Federation methods. Enemy reserves moving to reinforce their center, Susan announced to her staff. Signal Admiral Morrison to begin the flanking maneuver. We need to hit them before they can stabilize their formation. Admiral Jake Morrison received the order aboard Terra's Hope and immediately began repositioning his battle group. The veteran explorer had become one of humanity's most effective fleet commanders through a combination of caution and aggression that confused Void Hunter tactical algorithms. His ships moved like a pack of wolves hunting prey much larger than themselves. All ships prepare for maximum acceleration, Jake ordered. We're going to hit their weak point and break their line before they know we're coming. The flanking attack succeeded beyond expectations when Jake's forces caught a group of void hunters while they were feeding on debris from destroyed ships. The entities couldn't phase out while absorbing matter, and Jake's weapons tore through them like paper. The victory opened a gap in the enemy formation that the main fleet exploited immediately. Commander Beth Stevens watched the battle unfold from her diplomatic vessel while maintaining communications with Federation leaders scattered throughout the galaxy. Her reports of human tactical success were inspiring hope in species that had given up on survival. The galaxy was beginning to believe that the war could actually be won. The Christic Collective is requesting permission to commit their remaining battle fleets to human command, Beth reported to Earth. They're offering complete integration of their forces with our tactical doctrine. The offer represented a level of trust that would have been unthinkable before the crisis. The proud crystal beings were acknowledging that human leadership was their best hope for survival. Similar messages were arriving from other species as word of the victory spread. The battle ended with the complete destruction of the Void Hunter force and the liberation of the threatened star systems. Allied casualties were surprisingly light, considering the scale of the engagement, while enemy losses were catastrophic. The tide of war was turning, but everyone knew that the real test lay ahead in the galactic core, where the main Void Hunter fleet was gathering for a final confrontation. Admiral Jake Morrison stood before the largest war council in galactic history. Representatives from over 400 species filled the massive chamber aboard the mobile command station Unity, while holographic displays showed the gathering storm at the galaxy's heart. Intelligence reports indicated that millions of Void Hunter entities were converging on a single point where something ancient and terrible waited in the darkness. The primary nest is located in the Magellan sector near the galactic core, Jake announced to the assembled leaders. Our long-range sensors show a structure the size of a small moon surrounded by more Void Hunters than we've ever seen in one place. The display showed a nightmare vision of writhing shadow and twisted space where the fabric of reality itself seemed to be unraveling. The nest pulsed with dark energy while feeding tubes extended toward nearby stars and drained them of matter and light. Around it swirled clouds of Void Hunter entities in numbers that defied counting. Lieutenant Sarah Davis had spent weeks analyzing reconnaissance data from brave scout ships that ventured close to the nest. Her findings painted a picture of an intelligence so ancient and powerful that it existed partially outside normal time and space. The entity controlling the Void Hunter swarm was older than most of the civilizations it was destroying. The hive mind appears to be vulnerable during feeding cycles, Sarah reported to the Council. When it's actively draining stellar matter, it becomes more stable in our dimensional phase. That gives us a window of opportunity, but it only lasts for approximately 20 minutes. 20 minutes to strike at the heart of an enemy that had consumed hundreds of star systems. The margin for error was non-existent, and failure would mean the extinction of all intelligent life in the galaxy. Every species present understood that this was their final chance to strike back against the darkness. Commander Chris Taylor volunteered to lead the diversionary attacks that would draw Void Hunter forces away from the nest. His fast attack squadrons would hit targets throughout the galactic core while the main assault force approached their primary objective. The mission was essentially suicide, but Chris accepted it without hesitation. "My ships can keep their attention for maybe an hour," Chris told the assembled commanders. "That should give Admiral Morrison enough time to reach the nest and deploy the dimensional weapon." Dr. Amy Foster had created humanity's ultimate weapon against the Void Hunters, but it required precise coordination between human kinetic systems and alien energy manipulation technology. The device could collapse the dimensional barriers that protected the hive mind, but only if delivered directly to the nest's core structure. The reality-breaching warhead needs to be placed within 100 meters of the hive mind's central processing matrix, Amy explained to the technical staff. The explosion will cascade through multiple dimensions and should disrupt the entity's ability to exist in our reality. Engineer Roy Clark had modified a standard torpedo to carry the dimensional weapon, but getting it to the target would require running a gauntlet of millions of Void Hunter defenders. The delivery system was based on quantum uncertainty principles that would allow the weapon to phase through enemy shields and armor. The torpedo will exist in superposition until it reaches the target coordinates, Roy explained. The Void Hunters won't be able to intercept something that technically doesn't exist until the moment of detonation, Admiral Susan Blake coordinated. The massive logistical effort required to move the largest fleet in galactic history toward the core systems. Over 10,000 ships from hundreds of species were converging on the Magellan sector while supply lines stretched across the galaxy to support the operation. The scale was unprecedented in the history of space warfare. Final preparations are complete, Susan reported to Earth Command. All participating fleets report ready for the assault. We launch in 6 hours. The journey to the galactic core took 3 days, during which the Allied fleet maintained communication silence to avoid detection. Human stealth technology had been shared with alien vessels to mask their approach, but everyone knew the Void Hunters would eventually notice such a large force moving through their territory. Captain Rick Stone commanded the main assault group aboard Liberty's Edge, while Admiral Morrison led the overall operation from Terra's Hope. The two ships had been extensively modified with the latest quantum weapons and dimensional shields, but they would still be vastly outnumbered when the fighting began. Enemy contact in 30 minutes, Rick announced to his crew. All weapons report ready and the dimensional torpedo is loaded in Tube 1. Remember, we only get one shot at this. The Void Hunter response was immediate and overwhelming when the Allied fleet emerged from hyperspace near the nest. Millions of shadow entities swarmed toward the intruders, while reality itself seemed to twist and buckle under the strain of so many dimensional creatures existing in normal space. Commander Chris Taylor led his diversionary forces in a series of hit-and-run attacks that drew thousands of Void Hunters away from the nest. His ships fought desperately against impossible odds while transmitting false tactical data to confuse the enemy about the real assault target. Drawing heavy fire but maintaining formation, Chris reported as his flagship took damage from weapons that existed partially outside normal physics. The main force should have a clear approach vector in 10 minutes. Admiral Morrison pushed Terra's Hope through the chaos while enemy fire erupted around his small fleet. The quantum shields held against most attacks, but several escort vessels were lost to weapons that bypassed conventional defenses. Every meter closer to the nest cost them ships and crew members they couldn't afford to lose. Target in sight, Jake announced as the massive structure became visible through the swirling clouds of shadow entities. The nest is even larger than our estimates suggested. The hive mind must be drawing power from multiple star systems simultaneously. Dr. Amy Foster monitored the dimensional readings from her station aboard the science vessel Discovery. The energy patterns around the nest were unlike anything ever recorded and threatened to overload their sensor systems. The ancient intelligence at the heart of the structure was preparing to defend itself with powers beyond imagination. The hive mind is becoming active, Amy reported with alarm in her voice. It's starting to focus its attention on our assault force. We need to deploy the weapon before it can coordinate a full response. Captain Rick Stone brought Liberty's Edge into position for the final attack run while Void Hunter entities swarmed around his ship like angry insects. The quantum weapons carved paths through the enemy formation, but for every entity destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place. Torpedo launch in 30 seconds, Rick announced to his crew. All stations prepare for maximum acceleration immediately after firing. We need to get clear before the dimensional cascade begins. Engineer Roy Clark made final adjustments to the quantum torpedo from his position in the weapons bay. The device represented the combined knowledge of dozens of species and the hopes of trillions of sentient beings. Success would save the galaxy, while failure would doom it to eternal darkness. Torpedo ready for launch, Roy reported. The quantum guidance system is locked onto the hive mind's dimensional signature. Nothing should be able to stop it from reaching the target. The moment of truth had arrived as humanity and its allies prepared to strike at the heart of an enemy that had terrorized the galaxy for months. Everything depended on the next few minutes and whether courage and determination could triumph over ancient evil. Captain Rick Stone felt Liberty's edge shudder as the quantum torpedo launched from its tube and disappeared into the swirling chaos around the Void Hunter nest. The weapon existed in dimensional superposition, which made it invisible to conventional sensors, but Rick knew that millions of shadow entities were hunting for anything that threatened their ancient master. "Torpedo away," Engineer Roy Clark reported from the weapons bay. "Transit time to target is 47 seconds. The quantum guidance system is maintaining lock on the hive mind's dimensional signature." Around the assault fleet, the space battle reached levels of intensity that strained the fabric of reality itself. Void Hunter entities phased in and out of normal space, while human and alien ships responded with weapons that could strike across multiple dimensions. The ancient nest pulsed with malevolent energy as its controlling intelligence began to understand the true nature of the threat. Admiral Jake Morrison pushed Terra's Hope deeper into the enemy formation while coordinating the final phase of the attack. His crew worked with desperate efficiency as Void Hunter weapons hammered their shields and hull armor. Several escort vessels had already been lost, but the main assault force was still intact. "Dimensional readings are off the scale," Dr. Amy Foster reported from her monitoring station. "The hive mind is trying to shift the entire nest into another phase of reality. If it succeeds, our torpedo won't be able to reach the target." The ancient intelligence had finally recognized the danger and was using powers beyond galactic understanding to protect itself. Reality twisted around the nest as the creature attempted to remove itself from the dimension where the human weapon could harm it. The effort required enormous energy, but the hive mind had been feeding on stars for millennia. Commander Chris Taylor's diversionary forces were being systematically destroyed, but they had accomplished their mission by drawing away thousands of Void Hunter defenders. His flagship Valiant was badly damaged and losing atmosphere, but Chris refused to retreat while the main attack was still in progress. "All remaining ships continue the attack," Chris transmitted to his scattered squadrons. "Keep their attention focused on us for another 30 seconds. That's all Admiral Morrison needs to complete the mission." Lieutenant Sarah Davis tracked the torpedo's progress on her tactical display while monitoring Void Hunter response patterns. The enemy entities were converging on the nest in massive numbers, but their movements seemed confused and uncoordinated. The hive mind's attention was divided between defending itself and trying to escape into another dimension. "The torpedo is maintaining course toward the target," Sarah reported. "Enemy interference is minimal, but the nest itself is becoming unstable. The hive mind's dimensional shifting is causing structural fluctuations throughout the entire complex." Engineer Bob Miller watched his quantum field generators strain under the load as Liberty's Edge took heavy fire from Void Hunter weapons that existed partially outside normal physics. The ship's armor was holding, but several critical systems had been damaged and would need immediate repair if they survived the next few minutes. "Shield generators operating at 120% of rated capacity," Bob reported to Captain Stone. "We can maintain this level for maybe 10 more minutes before we start losing primary systems." Admiral Susan Blake coordinated the battle from her position aboard Democracy's Shield while receiving reports from across the engagement zone. The largest fleet in galactic history was fighting for its life against an enemy that had consumed hundreds of civilizations. Everything depended on a single weapon created by the galaxy's youngest spacefaring species. "All reserve squadrons move to support the main assault force," Susan ordered. "We need to keep the Void Hunters away from Admiral Morrison until the torpedo reaches its target." The quantum weapon had been traveling for 30 seconds when the hive mind finally located it, despite its dimensional camouflage. Millions of shadow entities converged on the torpedo's projected path, while reality itself seemed to bend around their movements. The ancient intelligence was using every resource at its disposal to stop the one thing that could destroy it. Captain Lisa Ward led her squadron in a desperate charge to protect the torpedo from interception. Her ships launched everything they had at the Void Hunter swarm while accepting fire that would have destroyed conventional vessels. The quantum-enhanced armor held against most attacks, but several ships were lost in the first few seconds of combat. "We're taking heavy casualties, but the torpedo is still on course," Lisa reported as her destroyer shook under enemy fire. "The Void Hunters are throwing everything they have at us, but we're holding the line." Dr. Amy Foster made final adjustments to the dimensional weapons detonation sequence from her console aboard the science vessel Discovery. The device would need to explode at precisely the right moment to cascade through multiple phases of reality and reach the hive mind in whatever dimension it was trying to hide. "Detonation in 10 seconds, Amy announced to the fleet. "All ships prepare for dimensional shockwave. The cascade effect will disrupt local spacetime and may interfere with navigation systems." Commander Janet Morris was already coordinating evacuation procedures for the surviving ships when the torpedo finally reached its target. The quantum weapon phased through the nest's outer defenses and penetrated deep into the structure where the ancient hive mind waited in its chamber of twisted reality. "All ships begin immediate withdrawal," Janet ordered. "Maximum acceleration away from the nest. The dimensional cascade will expand at light speed, and we need to be clear of the effect radius." Engineer Roy Clark monitored the weapon's final approach from his station while preparing for the explosion that would determine the fate of the galaxy. His calculations showed that the reality breach would propagate through 7 dimensions simultaneously and collapse the barriers that allowed the Void Hunters to exist partially outside normal space. "Contact with target in 3 seconds, Roy reported. "The quantum detonation should neutralize the hive mind's ability to control the Void Hunter swarm and trap the remaining entities in our dimensional phase where conventional weapons can destroy them." The explosion, when it came, was unlike anything ever witnessed in the galaxy. Reality itself seemed to crack around. The nest, as the dimensional weapon, released energies that existed in multiple phases of space-time simultaneously. The ancient structure that had taken millennia to build collapsed in seconds. As the hive mind's control over local reality was severe. Admiral Jake Morrison watched in amazement as millions of Void Hunter entities suddenly became visible and solid throughout the engagement area. The creatures that had terrorized the galaxy by phasing in and out of normal space were now trapped in a single dimension where human and alien weapons could finally destroy them. "All ships engage the enemy," Jake ordered. "The Void Hunters can no longer phase out of our attacks. This is our chance to finish them once and for all." The battle that followed was brief but decisive as the combined fleet unleashed everything they had against enemies that could no longer escape into dimensional hiding places. Weapons that had been ineffective for months suddenly found their targets while the leaderless Void Hunters struggled to coordinate their defense without the hive mind's guidance. Captain Rick Stone brought Liberty's Edge alongside the collapsing nest and confirmed that the ancient intelligence was finally dead. The creature that had consumed countless civilizations and threatened to devour the entire galaxy had been destroyed by weapons created by the species it had underestimated. "Target neutralized," Rick reported to the fleet. "The hive mind is gone, and the dimensional barriers are collapsing throughout this entire sector. The Void Hunter threat has been eliminated." The news spread through the surviving Federation networks faster than light-speed communications could carry it. Worlds that had been preparing for extinction suddenly found hope while refugee fleets began planning their return to liberated systems. The galaxy that had begged for help had finally received its answer. Admiral Susan Blake was appointed as the first human to serve as Federation Defense Coordinator in recognition of humanity's role in saving galactic civilization. Her first act was to establish early warning systems and rapid response fleets to prevent any similar threat from catching the galaxy. Unprepared again, Commander Beth Stevens worked to formalize the alliances that had formed during the crisis into a permanent structure for cooperation between species. The shared experience of fighting for survival had broken down barriers that had existed for thousands of years and created bonds that would last for generations. "The galaxy is no longer silent," Beth reported to Earth as the communication networks came back online across liberated space. Hundreds of species are broadcasting again, and the Federation is stronger than ever before," Dr. Amy Foster continued. Her research into dimensional weapons technology while working with alien scientists to develop defenses against similar threats. Her innovations had saved the galaxy, but she knew that the universe was vast and might contain other dangers that required preparation. The story concluded with humanity taking its place as a respected member of the galactic community while maintaining the qualities that had made their intervention successful.